everything we get is not for free, but we don't always pay that price.
Mm.
And so Upkeep, I wanted to make the question really immediate. What happens if you have to pay the price? Hi, I'm Ari Gross, writer and creator of Upkeep #2. You can find me at www.arigross.ca or at Instagram at college_st_comics. And you are watching and or listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are back with a returning guest on the show. It feels like it's been forever since he was last on. He is the writing creator, of course, Upkeep, the comic that we'll be talking about today, as well as Wardens and Awakenings. We're joined by the ever-talented Ari Gross. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing there?
It's been a while. I'm doing all right. A long, busy summer so far, and it's going to be an even busier rest of the year. So I'm glad you're able to pop onto the show here.
Staying cool? It's been hot this week.
Well, luckily, because of all my IT stuff that I do with DIT work in TV and film, I stay indoors as much as I can.
Sweaters on, 35 degrees outside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They can handle the heat. I don't have to worry about
Yeah.
it. For those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
So I am Ari Gross. I have written about 10, maybe 9, I forget, short comic stories, or published about that many. And I guess at this point, this will be my fourth full issue comic. I'm writing primarily 2 series, Wardens, which takes place in the 1920s in Toronto, and sort of more of an action comedy series, and Upkeep, which takes place also in Toronto, but currently, and that's more of a horror family drama. The gist of the story is in Upkeep #1, Adam and Yvonne are looking for a house, looking for this home in Toronto. You know, they can't afford anything. They're priced out of the market. Everything's crazy expensive because, of course, it is. But they end up getting the keys to this mysterious mansion called Garrison Manor, which exists just across an old creek that used to exist in Toronto called Garrison Creek, which runs sort of north-south in the Toronto's West End, which is kind of fun because then I can have the house, drop them off anywhere across the creek, which no longer exists. It's now a sewer system. It got paved over about 100 years ago. So also ask the question, why is the house at Garrison Creek? You know, there's a whole interesting backstory, but that's going to be very slowly teased out. I think the mystery here is more important than, you know, the reveal. So they have the ability to go to this house. They'll give them anything they want. Absolutely anything in the world that, you know, something that really exists, they can get it. You want the Mona Lisa in your bedroom? Fine. You want 1,000 Mona Lisas? Go for it. Whatever. The only thing is, once in a while, the house demands a bit of upkeep. It demands you find the worst person you know, the person who's committed the most evil, the most sins in their life. They go to the basement. No one really knows what happens to them in the basement, but you don't really hear from them again. And that's the bargain. It's kind of like a Little Shop of Horrors meets the housing crisis, is how I like to think of it. You know, what would you do for your dream house? Who would you kill for your dream house? And so I'm really interested in exploring a whole variety of themes. Upkeep deals with sort of, you know, very modern middle class issues about raising a family and the cost of that, and what would you do if you could, you know, make things a little easier? How far would you go? Kind of like a Little Shop of Horrors-y sort of vibe to it. Or Warren's keeps things a bit different, a little lighter in some way, a little darker in others, actually. I've got other stories I've been writing, lots of side projects. I've been working on this 64-page one-shot standalone called sort of a Christmas revenge horror comic called Nutcracker, which I'm having a blast writing. That should be coming out hopefully next year. I've got an artist for that, and maybe I'll come back and chat about it with you, Kurt, when the time is right.
I'm always happy to have you on the show here because this is the most Canadian I can get, you know, when it comes to having
very
guests
Canadian,
on the show.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So
bring in the CanCon. That's Canadian content for those of you who aren't Canadian.
Yeah. If only I was sponsored by the CBC, it would be so much better.
Working on it.
Yeah. The one thing I loved about Upkeep, and I got to read the entire first issue of Upkeep on Global Comics, which really helped me kind of understand your sense of humor, but also the horror side of things that you were trying to go for. I thought it was a great read. I enjoyed it. I can't wait to see how this new amazing couple and family, I should say, of Adam and Yvonne are going to deal with issue 2. Garrison Manor, I think, is an interesting concept when it comes to having a house as like a third character, as it were. It does also weaponize the housing crisis, which is massive in all of Canada and the United States. But what is the most horrifying real detail you included that hits too close to home for readers?
There's definitely some stuff here might be, my lawyer would advise me to say everything is, all fictional, but obviously, everything is based where we come from. And the issues that we deal with in Upkeep, I want them to be very close to real life issues. Primarily, the first issue, which deals about it even more than the second issue, is about housing. It's about trying to find a place. In the first issue, someone was living next to a terrible neighbor. We've all been there. Every single person ever has lived next to maybe the person's above you or below you or beside you or the person across the street, but there's always someone who you're like, I gotta watch out for this guy. This guy's gonna kill me. Watching to see when they're outside their house so I don't go. Or, there's always something. You got to put a bit of that in there, and I feel like that's quite relatable. But Upkeep 2 shifts the conversation a little bit from housing, even though it still stays on that, into daycare. I have 2 kids. My eldest is just finishing elementary school. When I started looking for daycare for her, it was just so difficult in Toronto. I don't know how it is in everywhere else. I imagine smaller towns might be a different story than the bigger cities, but certainly in Toronto, and Upkeep is a very Toronto-based story. It generalizes especially well to large cities, Vancouver, San Francisco, New York. Finding childcare, affordable childcare, is extremely hard sometimes. That's what I wanted to write about here. Once they got the house, that's great. So now what do you have? Oh, you got to get your kid in daycare. So you got to find the spot and you got to be able to afford a spot. And that's an interesting question to contrast with the idea of you have a house that can give you anything you want. Every issue goes 1 year forward in time.
Okay.
Issue 1, they just move into the house. Issue 2, they've been there for almost a year. Their son's a year older. They've gotten time to enjoy it. They're getting into things. And so I want it to be a long story that tells the story of raising a family in a place of privilege, but with a dark underlying. Even if you get everything you want, even if you have this wonderful life, there is an inherent wickedness. There is a cost to it that maybe you don't have to pay. Maybe somebody else has to pay, but I don't know, man. Like, you might have to pay some of that cost at the end of the day, too. So that's the shtick for Upkeep and for Garrison Manor. We'll talk more about the manor, I'm sure, as we get into this. Yeah.
And here I thought taxes were bad in Toronto.
It's actually, taxes in Toronto are relatively good compared to some other Canadian cities. They're relatively low, and whether or not they should be that low is a question of great public debate. But the price of buying a house is extremely high. I can't remember if it's higher than Vancouver right now, but it's not great. I'll just tell you, it's not great.
Here's the funny thing. Down in southwestern Ontario, our former mayor decided to advertise to everyone in Toronto saying, we have affordable housing here. So we had a mass migration of Torontonians come down our way, buy up all of the houses for like 500 to 750,000. They thought it was a steal.
It's a steal. Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah. How did that working out? Are people living down there?
Yeah, they're living down here, or they're Airbnb-ing their places down here, whatever the case may be. But it's an interesting shift of lifestyle. So
next time I walk into $500,000, I'll keep it in mind.
Sure, you've always had great characters, but I love seeing this side of it because now we're seeing your family dynamics when it comes to what you're building, and that's what I think I love about your writing is you're very relatable, and you bring your characters together, and it makes you want to root for them, whether it's in Wardens or whether it's in Upkeep in this particular case. But Adam and Yvonne are really dealing with, like you said, the housing market, raising family. That's got to be very difficult, very challenging in that respect. What's the line where readers go from I do that for a house to absolutely not? What's that line? Because there's got to be something there.
Oh, there's got to be a line. They're not crossing it, at least for, I think, the average reader. They're not crossing it yet, but we will get there. And that's part of the fun of the series. I mentioned the first issue, the first person sent to the basement, put it that way, was Adam's terrible neighbor. This guy's a universally unlikable figure, a jerk in absolutely every way. And Adam gets, as part of the perks of the house, it gets him to sort of confess his sins. Adam can ask people, what's the worst thing you've ever done? And they'll respond. You can see people's auras. You can see sort of get a sense of how bad a person they are. And also the house wants people who have done worse. It gives them longer. It feeds off their badness. So built into this is the idea that you can't just give the house like an innocent baby and it'll give you like 10 years. Like that would be a very different moral issue, but I wanted to make something so that it's tempting, so that you're like, yes, the house demands we give it bad people. And that's okay, because bad people deserve to go away. These people should be removed from our society. We should find the worst people. We should send them to the house or whatever. Like, you can make that argument to yourself. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's an interesting way to start. So for the first issue, Adam's verse, sacrifice of the house, Costa, that's personal. Someone who's personally, threatened to kill him, personally threatened him, made him feel miserable, The second issue, Adam's moving into a bit of a different strategy. He wants to find people. The new plan is he's going to feed the house hitmen, seasoned, hired killers. He has some rules about it, over a certain age, no dependents. There's a bit of a negotiation between Adam and Yvonne for how can we almost do this. They don't say it ethically, but essentially it's an ethical negotiation. How do we find a person who is bad enough and doesn't have these other qualities that can disqualify them? If that's what your approach to this, I'm going to be a killer of killers, do good for society, you can kind of get on board with that. At least the reader can get on board with that a lot more than if, you have to, sacrifice an innocent person or something. And so what I want to do is start off from this and then show over the years how that might change someone. Even if you stick to the plan, after you've put a dozen people in the basement, maybe the 13th is like, it's a little easier. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how we move from trying to follow their plan for finding people who are explicitly bad people, and then how that changes them and how the definition of who is a bad person might loosen up a little bit. But we're not there yet. That's going to take a while because it's a slow burn. That character arc in particular is going to be something I'm enjoying writing over a long period of time.
How many issues are we thinking of here? Like, do we have a set thing, or is this as you feel the need to expand upon it, is this going to be I've done issue 2. No, all of a sudden I'm at issue 20. This is awesome. I love it. This is still great.
I have the first 6 issues mapped out. I don't have them all written out, but I know exactly the arc for the first 6 issues. It's like it introduces the house, it introduces the major characters. There's a bit of stuff where you're reading it in the last issue and this issue and stuff that relate to Adam and his studies and stuff like that. And, it might not seem like it's going anywhere, but that's all building towards this arc, which will culminate more in, I guess, issue 5 and eventually spill into issue 6. In total, I see this as a 15 to 20 issue story. I don't have an exact number, but I have a few acts. I wanted to tell the story long enough to have them raise a family in the house. It's a story of Adam and Yvonne, but it's also really a story of their child now and what will eventually be kids, to show sort of what it means to grow up in Garrison Manor and how that affects you. And at the end of the day, when it's time for, someone, let's say, to move out around, let's say 18 years old, around then most people would like go to university or something or move out of the house. What does it mean when you've lived in this place and it's time for you to move on? Can you even move on? Should you stay? Should you go? So I think those are the questions I want to move towards. It'll take, I think, about 20 years of like lived experience for the characters to get there. Well, it'll probably take me 20 years of lived experience to create it. But there's also lots of side stories. There's lots of backstories. I've been really enjoying writing notes for stuff that happens in the history of Garrison Manor as well, because I want this to be a fairly ambiguous. Who knows how old this house is? Who knows, is it even a house? Like, why is it here? Like, all those questions, I think you can answer them, but it's much more interesting if you slowly tease out the answer than if you just be like, Garrison Manor was founded in 1740, whatever, like that's boring, right? The mystery compels it. And I have a lot of interesting stories about individuals in the history of it. Specifically, I'm thinking of a psychiatrist following the First World War who ends up getting possession of the house. Because I like to think the idea is like, you have this house that gives you anything, but it's been a secret. And only a small number of people have been in possession of it. And so each of their stories is going to be very interesting, which is why at the end of the comic, Upkeep number 1, I said, Garrison Manor, Adam Keller era, year 1. And so this is the story of the Adam Keller era of Garrison Manor. I've, purposefully made it so that it has a history as long as, I want it to be. You can add a lot more there.
And that's what I love about this. It's that be careful what you wish for mentality and scenarios that you're building up here. What is the darkest be careful what you wish for moment in Upkeep 2? I know you mentioned Hitman, but knowing how you write and how you work, you got to have something else that you're going to just bam explode on us there.
Yeah, I've got all this kind of stuff. So I'll tell you this. Towards the beginning, Adam is researching something and makes a discovery. Makes an incredible discovery that has completely validated some research that he was doing when he was a student that he thought went nowhere. It's the kind of thing that if you ask a house for anything in the world and you ask it for he's looked around the world for a thing and he finally finds it. And it's mind-blowing. And it's a huge secret that he can't wait to tell everyone, except he can't tell anybody because where is he even going to say he got the things? The rules for the house are you can take something outside of the house for 1 day. Everything's fine as long as it kind of comes back to the house in 24 hours. So, maybe he could take it out, but who would he show? So it's the question of he finds this thing that is fantastic for him and his career and could totally change the way that people view his field that he's in, which he's no longer even any sort of a former PhD student. He can't do anything about it. And so I like the idea of even if you can have something that give you everything you want, what does he really want? Does he want the thing because it gives him fame, because it gives him money, it gives him status and respect in his like academic discipline that he found this discovery? What happens if you can't get that? If it's just a thing that you know? I wanted to touch on that because that's sort of in part of setting up this longer story that I'm telling for the first arc, but also it's a character moment. It's what do you do when you're in this situation? And, how they resolve the scene, I think is kind of nice, with, him and Yvonne. Essentially, they agree that, it's a secret. So instead of looking at something as a discovery that has to be shared, maybe you just have to recontextualize it as a secret that you get to keep. And I think that's kind of a bit of the lesson of Upkeep is that it's this mansion, but they're not sharing the mansion. The mansion's a secret to them. As much as you might want to tell someone about the amazing thing you've got, they can't or they won't. And so that's going to be interesting as it goes on when, of course, the question is, can you keep this a secret? And what happens if, sometimes the secret gets out a little? But that's for another issue.
You always have great people working around you, especially when it comes to your comics here. Who's the team around you this time around when it came to Upstage, and how did you find them?
I have the same team that worked on the first issue of Upkeep. We have Keter LeBeau, Miriam Yasser, and Rob Jones. Keter is the artist, Miriam's the colorist, and Rob Jones is the letterer. Keter, how did I find him? Found him online, basically. I put out a call for artists, and usually I get a bunch of responses. Most of them aren't very good quality. The ones that are very good quality are just not the right style. And some people are just like frauds, and someone's like, I can do something in any style. And then they'll send me like 10 different styles and I recognize two of them and they're from different people. Like, because he was like, oh, this indie comic, no one's seen this before. I was like, yeah, I've seen that comic. I know it's not you. Like, I got so pissed off at that. Any industry, there's bullshit and you have to get good at detecting the bullshit. I just kind of hate that there is bullshit in this industry. And so like whenever I see it, I still feel like a bit of a moral, just like, get out of here. Like, but no, everyone here, forget talking about bullshit. Everyone here is great. I just found them online. I just kept on looking until I found them, I think, for these guys. Some people I find in interesting ways. These were just like blunt force going through people's art station and also understanding, is the style going to work, right? Because everything I write, I typically have a different style for. The artist for Wardens frankly, is not appropriate for Upkeep. I mean, I think he would do a good job of it, but his style, I think, is so well suited to Wardens. When I close my mind, I think of Upkeep, I don't think in his style. And the same thing for Upkeep. I can't see the artist for Upkeep drawing Wardens. It just doesn't work in my mind. It's a great team. And Rob Jones, the letterer, he is the fastest working person I have encountered in comics. I want to emphasize that. Fastest working person. Which is not something that, normally you brag about people's quality or, I mean, his quality is high. In an industry where speed actually kind of matters, you don't want to be waiting on the letterer, which is typically the last person for a long time. Rob, shout out to you. Keep doing what you're doing, which you do well and quickly. So, oh yes, of course, the last person who I should mention is my longtime editor, Aubrey Lynn Jepson. She's great. I always say this and I mean it. If you like anything I write, it's because she made it a better version of what it was initially. So editors are everyone's secret weapon. They don't get enough attention or notice. Hopefully they get respect. Yeah, I just got to bang on the editor drum a lot more because I know how much she has transformed my stories into. That's kind of a good idea to, okay, this is actually good. I think she's ending half the people I know.
Pretty much, it's hard to pick one.
Her reputation kind of speaks for herself once you start like, oh, you're just busy. That's a sign that people like you.
And that's a good thing, too. Going back to Keter here, especially when it came to the art and the design of Garrison Manor, how did he make it feel like a character, both as a dream house and as a nightmare?
So Garrison Manor is a house that reflects the style and the desire of its owners. I wanted this iteration of Garrison Manor. If you ever show a previous version, it'll look totally different. It could look like, like the Scarface mansion, or like Downton Abbey, like, whatever you think is a fancy rich person's house, that's what it's going to be for you. And so for Adam and Yvonne, their idea is mid-century modern. They love like 40s to 60s, like real like Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, there's many others too, but like that sort of era of things, that's the biggest thing that people will probably know. Clean lines, lots of wood, natural colors, and a certain type of color as well. Big windows, nice clean furniture, but also like, it's just fun. It's a mansion that can have anything. So like, oh, there's just a Picasso on the wall in the background. There's, the Renoir over there. Like a lot of it's like kind of wish fulfillment. There's just fancy stuff around. It's like, I got the Mona Lisa in my bedroom. Why not? That kind of sort of attitude. The manor definitely, it has a personality to it, but the personality is very much reflective of the main characters. Although, as maybe without saying too much, you'll kind of see what the personality of the manager might be a little like in some of the future issues. I think we're going to give it a chance for its personality to come out even more in interesting ways.
You did mention Rob Jones and of course his lettering, which is really amazing. I do love the lettering on this. It's very easy to read. It hits in every panel, and it's clean. And I think that's the epitome of a great letterer as well too. Rob Jones's lettering amps up the horror. How do sound effects or textiles heighten scares or comedy?
Letterers can do so much to add to a story. I mean, obviously, they put the words on the page so people can read it, but it's much more than that. You can tell if a letterer is good for the story if the style of lettering really gels with the general theme of the story. So I do my own lettering for Wardens, which is 44 pages and is a lot of lettering. Some of the sound effects are drawn into the background, but a lot of them I do myself. The style of lettering I use for Wardens is totally different than the style that Rob uses for Upkeep. It's very interesting just to see even the differences. Like, I mean, the nitty-gritty stuff about, like how many words to a line and the shape of the word balloons and stuff. I would just never do it his way. He does it a very different way. And I like that. I like the fact that the balloons are a little uneven. It's more hand drawn because Upkeep shouldn't feel as perfect as I kind of want Wardens to feel. It should feel a little rougher. It doesn't have to aspire to like absolute perfection and like everything's placed well, but it's a different feel is what I'm trying to say. And of course, the right sound effects goes very far. I think, early on the comic, the Kickstarter page, when people take a look at it, there's Adam riding on ATV with a rocket propelled grenade launcher and raccoons driving in. There's little whatever in the background that tails along. Like those little things. I try not to have a ton of sound effects because I usually want the picture to speak for itself.
Mhm.
But there's a few times where I'll definitely put some stuff in. It's always a question of not even like how good is it going to be, because obviously it's going to be good if you trust the person, but does it add anything?
Right.
And that's, I think, the question, as a writer at least, is always like, if it doesn't truly add anything, don't put it in. And so it's always asking yourself, like, is it better with or without? I don't know which artist said it best. I'm sure many. It should be exactly what it is, but no more. And that's something that, certainly my editor works very hard with my dialogue. If I could like have a little mental image of my editors like taking my dialogue and just like putting into like a wood chipper and like taking the random shavings out and being just like figure out how to make this stuff work.
Yeah.
Not that huge stuff you put in before, like something small. And so I try to do that with sound effects as well. It's very easy in early drafts to be like sound effects everywhere, and then you just have to keep cutting back because comics are a visual medium, and you
Yeah.
want the art to speak for itself. Sometimes the sound effects really adds, and sometimes it doesn't, and it's a case by case basis that you have to decide for yourself.
What I love about this particular comic is the colors, and Marion Masser did an amazing job on this. From what I've seen with issue 1 and the stills that are in the lower third here with issue 2, they're just beautiful. But color theory, especially colors in comics, can shift from cozy to terrifying, especially in
Mhm.
Upkeep here. How did she use the palette to manipulate readers' emotion?
So there's a lot of scenes that are outside and in different places, and we made sure that those scenes had more blues, more greens, and I mean there's a whole scene in daycare because it's all about daycare. And I think that scene for that is like more gray. And everything at the house, especially inside the house, is more warm tones.
Right.
First of all, mid-century modern, that's one of the main color themes of that style, so it goes very well with that. But it also, like you said, it has sense of like, warm tones are homey. If you go to a room that's not blood red, but like, like a terracotta or something, or like a dark orange or brown, it feels kind of like a nice cozy den.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very basic color theory. If you walk into a room that's like bright pink or something like that, that says something, but it doesn't say like welcome to a cozy house. That says like welcome to a fun place or a different place. And so a lot of the scenes inside the house have that kind of more sort of homey color, which, works well because a red background could be just kind of nice and comforting, or it could be sort of dark and ominous, depending on how you use it. Make that work with your particular scene or your panel. One thing I'm doing for Upkeep, for some of the higher tiers on Kickstarter, I'm releasing a coloring book version of it. So this is the first time I'm trying this. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be the 26 pages. So yeah, 28 pages, 32 pages, including the cover in the back.
Sure.
I've been looking at printer stuff all day, so I've got like page numbers in my mind. But yeah, 28 interior pages, so I'll put extra couple of images there. But it's going to be basically the inks. So the black and white version, no text, different stock, so you can actually like color on it instead. It's not going to be glossy or anything, uncoded. And I'm interested to see how people react to that. Is getting a physical book that you can then color in, is that something that people would find fun? I kind of think it is. I also, if you have the version of the comic, you've read the comic, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool, and then you can go back to a particular panel and just do that, or something you like. I mean, I'm gonna do it. My kids are gonna do it. My kids are gonna be coloring this coloring book like constantly. I'll see how they do. It's gonna be hard to beat Miriam. She's really good, but I don't know. I have faith in my 12-year-old.
As any doting parent would, I'm sure.
Yeah,
When it comes to redesigning, maybe you're sparking their new passion for real estate, redecorating.
that's right. Yeah, I have a passion.
It's cheaper.
Instill the passion for real estate very young. That's what I'm teaching myself out of Upkeep.
You're also, it's cheaper than sending them to college, and you'll know early on if they even want to go. So there you go.
That's right. Yeah,
You're saving yourself money in the long run. That's really good.
try before you buy.
If only you could do that in today's Toronto housing market, right?
Oh man, yeah.
With your characters here, Adam and Yvonne, besides, the murder house that they live in, are actually pretty relatable. They're a wonderful family. They bounce off each other well with their conversations. Adam and Yvonne are also bad people making bad decisions. That's the other twist you have with this particular storyline. How do you keep them likable despite the body count?
I think it's interesting to ask whether or not they are bad people and what our concept of a bad person is. So I write them as very relatable. They're good to their friends, they're good parents, they're trying to do the best for their family and all that. Does that make you a bad person? Like the question of what makes you a bad person? Is getting rid of a killer a bad person? Is getting rid of a terrible person who's been really bad to you? Does that make you a bad person? And I think part of the question of Upkeep is going to be, when do they cross the line from being likable people to people who do things that might be too morally gray to the point of being irredeemable. And one of the main things about Upkeep is I want to really make immediate and manifest the idea that any privilege we have usually comes at the cost of somebody else, either historically or geographically, somewhere far off. I bought a pair of very cheap shoes the other day for my son. You take a second and ask yourself, who made these shoes? What are they getting paid? What's their life like? What's their conditions that they're working in? And that's just for a thing that I know, created in a factory by people working in, suboptimal conditions. What about all the things I don't know? There's so many things that we benefit from that come at the cost of everybody else. Everything we get is not for free, but we don't always pay that price. And so Upkeep, I wanted to make the question really immediate. What happens if you have to pay the price for the things you get? You have to pay that cost directly. Is it more honest? There's a great line from the DC Flintstones comic written by Mark Russell, which I think is a great comic. I think it's the first issue where these more primitive hunter-gatherers join the quarry. They get their first taste of sort of society, of capitalism, essentially, what it means to work for somebody else. And one of them says, it just seems like a way to get other people to do your killing for you. I really, really loved that line. And I feel like Upkeep is kind of an extension of that question. What if you didn't get other people to do your killing for you? What if you did your killing yourself?
It's a pity that there's no HOA around Garrison Manor. I think they would solve at least 2 or 3 years worth of issues, when it came to the house. Speaking of Garrison Manor here, if it had a Yelp review, what would the nicest neighbor write about it?
Very quiet, very respectful neighbor. You never even know they're there. That's one thing I like about Garrison Manor is Garrison Manor is located just across Garrison Creek, or like where I said, where Garrison Creek used to be. This is a now buried creek that runs north, south, and west end Toronto. And so it can be anywhere along there. And so nobody really knows where it is, or even what it means to be somewhere, or what the house is. And that's something that actually comes up a bit in this issue. Adam's wondering, maybe I should try to figure out what's going on with this house. Yvonne cautions him against it, and that's a character moment I'll leave for the comic. But I like the fact that it's not just at one place. It's more of like an idea that you enter, but it's bounded geographically. It's in one place, so it's tied to not just one neighborhood, a series of neighborhoods, but a body of water. And I think there's something interesting about tying a location to a river or a lake. I've always liked the idea of things being tied to water somehow. And also just the fact that I live in the West End of Toronto, I think it's very interesting that there was a waterway here. It was very small. There was a series of creeks that have been since covered up. And I think local history is something I try to put a lot of in my comics, even though, it's a contemporary comic, takes place now. I wanted the history, the fact that we have literally buried this river that used to be here. So you can bury something, but that doesn't mean it goes away.
Hmm.
That's, I think, a theme that we'll come back to over and over in Upkeep.
There's going to be a lot of haunted mansions or haunted areas of Toronto that probably researched or you maybe visited in your lifetime, etc. What are some that if someone was visiting Toronto, they should see?
I haven't actually been to any haunted mansions or anything because my wife would not like that. So that's been an interesting thing, which is like I don't tend to believe in ghosts or have any experience with them. I've never had a supernatural experience. So, whether or not, what anyone takes away from this is up to them. It's, some people are much more into the idea of ghosts. Some people just bounce off it. Some people see things, some people can't. Her grandfather, he was from China. When he was a child, he died and then came back to life after, I can't remember, a few days. It was one of those things where they were having his funeral and he sat up. This is like a real story. This isn't like a ghost story or this is like an actual thing that happened apparently. Ever since then, for the rest of his life, he could see ghosts. The tip off was that their mouths were moving, but no sound was ever coming out and no one else really could see them. So he used to go from house to house if the grandkids or any of his kids wanted to look into a place and they were like, "Is this haunted?" He would come, check the place out and let them know because he could see. It's this fascinating part of her family history, which is totally not present in my family history. We don't have any like history of ghosts or people with second sight or anything like that. But that's been something I've been thinking a lot about is, place. And people often talk about, ghosts being tied to actual mansions and houses and things. It's very interesting.
Is there a reason why place is important to you? Because it seems like throughout your stories, from Wardens to Upkeep and all of your others as well too, you're always searching for a place. Do you not feel like you found your place?
I've actually found my place here. I'm from Montreal originally. I've probably gone on a rant about some of the this stuff before, but I grew up in Montreal as an Anglo-Quebecer. I was a linguistic minority. So I grew up in a place that was specifically, my neighborhood was very English. I went to an English school. But if you want to be a part of broader Quebec society, you pretty much have to be Quebecois. Like you don't have to be not just francophone, but like culturally and identity wise more than even just the language. And the language, of course, is a challenge if you don't really grow up speaking it. The Quebecois, for those of you who don't know, is a more challenging version of French than you might encounter in a place like Paris. Strong accent, people talk fast, lots of slang, very difficult to understand, have a conversation with people unless you like really have an ear for it.
Mm.
And it's the kind of thing that I just did not have an ear for it as a child. Even though I enjoyed the place I was at, I still didn't feel part of the broader society. There were barriers. Now, when I go back to Montreal, which I do from time to time, I'm much better at French. So like I don't really have those issues. I can go into like a French store and have a conversation in French and it's not a big deal. But as a kid, I was just like this confused like Anglo who like just didn't know what to do. Also against the backdrop of like Quebec separatism in like, the 80s and 90s when what language you spoke meant something, it didn't necessarily imply your political
Mm.
affiliation, but basically no one who was English was a Quebec separatist, where, it was more distributed. The opinions were more diverse amongst francophones, amongst the Quebecois.
Right.
So I didn't really feel like I was part of that society. And coming to Toronto, Toronto doesn't have that same kind of issue of like linguistic split. Toronto is a city that has lots of people from lots of places. You have pockets of ethnic groups, linguistic pockets. There's no two solitudes. There's no, English versus French. One minority that takes up 30% of the population or whatever, and the other takes up 70%.
Mm.
Like those situations usually are politically more challenging than a multipolar diversity, which is one reason I think Toronto has succeeded in ways, obviously there's issues of race and stuff like that. There's obviously racism and stuff, but like it's not the same kind of like one minority versus a majority. It's more specific, isolated issues with respect to each minority's specific issues,
Hmm.
versus like Vancouver, for example, where it's like overwhelmingly Chinese in some parts, overwhelmingly South Asian in some parts, and still pretty white in other parts. You don't get the same kind of mass ethnic blocks, at least in downtown Toronto. The suburbs might be different, which is just interesting, and it's something that I've gelled with because I like the idea of living in a cosmopolis, a city where everyone comes from, where people just get along. We might have different political opinions, but somehow we're not killing each other. Like we work at it, And there's only a handful of cities that are really like that in the world, and I happen to be in one, and I really enjoy it here.
Obviously, conventions are a great way to promote comics. You've done that many years now. If a fan said, I'll only read Upkeep if you convince me in 10 seconds, what's your pitch?
Who would you kill for your dream house? Everybody would kill somebody for their dream house. Of course you would. Who would you kill?
Let's start with the real estate agent.
They're like, how many real estate agents?
How many are in Toronto that have screwed you over?
No comment. He's actually okay.
Okay, fair enough. Because this is kind of horror themed, even though it's more psychological horror, but has hints of like horror. What horror movie? What's a horror movie that made you laugh when you shouldn't have?
I think a lot of the 80s horror movies made me laugh, but also I've watched them years later.
Right.
Like I didn't watch like Nightmare on Elm Street when it came out when I was a child. I watched it, in college.
Mm.
So, some distance and age goes a long way for making something that is like, you know, actually kind of ridiculous, but scary to being actually kind of ridiculous and scary. And now it's also dated.
Sure.
Or it's not as scary because, like, we've seen this. It's not the first time we've seen this kind of thing. But what I really love in horror movies is I'm a massive fan of dark comedies or
Mm.
horror movies that bridge the gap between comedy and horror. Who said it? It must have been, I'm gonna say it was Jordan Peele, who was the only
Mm.
difference between, comedy and horror is a soundtrack. It's really the same kind of like someone gets hit on the head and falls down a well. Is that sad or is that funny?
Mm.
Well, it can go either way, right? It depends how you play it. Movies that can do both and that walk that line and that can whiplash that tonal whiplash just are so good. I think a good example of is Bong Joon-ho's Parasite,
Oh yeah.
which won the Academy Award for Best Film some years ago. That was one of those films where scenes go from like you're literally laughing and then like someone breaks their neck and you're like, oh shit. Like, but if you put like a whip, if you put like a crazy sound effect, it would be funny. It can do either. I really like those movies that skate that line.
Mm.
I think it's probably not surprising that my favorite horror movies, Evil Dead
Oh
2
yeah.
or, Army of Darkness growing up, like those kind of things where it's just like it's actually just really funny, but it's actually scary. If you can do both of those, you've got my vote.
Even Young Frankenstein, to a certain extent, if you've never
Mm.
seen Frankenstein, even though it has its classic Mel Brooks comedy, there are some cases where if you just saw the monster first off, it'd be like, oh my god, that's a scary thing, but it's a pure comedy throughout.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, Finish this sentence, Ari. The housing market is worse than blank.
Than it's ever been to buy a house, especially for young people.
Mm.
The cost of housing, I read somewhere, is about as high as two-thirds of your income. I believe I'm speaking from a Toronto perspective, but of course, there's many issues elsewhere. In Canada, Toronto, Vancouver are the worst. Montreal is just, it's getting worse than it used to be. I believe even Halifax is bad these days.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In Toronto, it takes about 10 times the average household income to buy a house. 10 years ago, it was 6 times, and 20 years ago, it was 4 times.
Jeez.
And it's still going up. So that means 20 years ago, if you were thinking about buying a house 20 years ago and you decided not to, and you want to buy a house now it's going to take 250% more of your income than you would have had to have back then. Obviously, forget about the ratio of like what you're doing with your life in terms of like to actually have that money. It's nuts. And that's been my big thing is like everyone asks, when's the best time to buy a house in Toronto? It's like it was before. It's not now. It's never going to be in the future. It was whenever you had money and like popped in a time machine and went back to like a time when things were affordable. And I think that's the big question that a lot of people are facing when they're looking to buy, the first house or
Mm-hmm.
they're looking to move from an apartment that they've been renting to a place. We rented an apartment for many years.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to rent forever. I actually do have a house, but it happened to come up, and there was some things about it that other people didn't like that I was fine with. Like literally, that's why I have it. It's like we don't have a parking spot or garage, or like it's across from a bar. Like these things that people are like deal breakers. We're like, I can live with that. I grew up actually living across from a fire station.
Okay.
So I got very used to hearing just like loud noises constantly. So being across from a bar is not such a big deal for me. I know people who are trying to buy their first houses now, and that's like, hey man, like the price of the housing's gone up like double in 10 years. So has your salary gone up double? Like mine hasn't.
It's like you have to choose between raising a family or buying a house.
That's right. And daycare, which we're talking about in this issue, that's the kicker. People talk about daycare like it's paying a second rent. You can actually pay as much in daycare as you pay in rent. I have seen it. I have not quite done it because I got lucky at a place that was like not the most expensive, but there are the most expensive places. And in that case, it's like how hard is it to afford rent in a major city? Now
Yeah.
imagine doing that twice and doing it just so you can send your child so that you can earn the money so you can pay the first rent, forget the second rent. The whole thing is very complex, and I believe that's an issue that is a major challenge for our generation in terms of finding affordable childcare, especially if you want to have women in the workplace going back to work. You can't have a situation in which it would cost more to have someone else look after your child than you would save or earn from going to work. Like that's just a bad choice to make. That's why I want to put daycare on this one because, even once you get the house, you're not out of the woods yet.
If Garrison Manor offered you one real life wish with its usual consequences, would you take it?
The answer is no, but only because I know how Upkeep ends.
Spoiler. Well, Ari, I do hate to say it, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. As always, it's great to chat.
Before I let you go, where can we find you? Where's the campaign? And I know we didn't talk about it, but what are you offering in the campaign as well? And where can we find you to support you, etc.?
So you can find the campaign at www.upkeepcomic.com. That'll go right to the Kickstarter campaign, upkeepcomic.com. You can find me at arigross.ca, ARIGROSS.ca, and I'm on Instagram at college_ST_comics, College Street Comics. In for the campaign, we've got the digital and physical copies of Upkeep 2. I'm also selling digital and physical copies of Upkeep 1. Everything will come included with a digital copy of Upkeep 1 because I want you to get caught up with the story, but we have some physical copies that you can also get to catch up physically if you want to. Got some 4 trading cards. Every comic I do has these trading cards that I make for the characters, which is like a little, little extra info, a little world building, just a little fun. I've got a bookmark featuring some of the art from the comics that you can actually see below over here. Some of these will be featured in the bookmark. And the coloring book, which I mentioned earlier, essentially the inks with a couple extra pages in there for fun. And finally, the highest tier reward is you can get drawn into Upkeep number 3. So the art for Upkeep number 3 hasn't quite started yet. I promised Petter I give him a little bit of a break over the summer because he has been working so wonderfully hard on this one. By the time this is done, I will know who wants to be in Upkeep number 3. I hope it's all of you.
I love it. That's great. Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast you can find at twogeekstalking.podbean.com or just search Two Geeks Talking. It's TWO, wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.